Have you ever noticed that strange, tight feeling in your chest? When a close friend shares a big win, a new promotion, or a sudden stroke of luck. And instead of feeling pure joy, you just feel a sudden, cold distance. Welcome, and please know right away that if you have ever felt this, you are not a bad person, and you are far from alone in experiencing it, as it is a feeling so many people navigate but almost never admit out loud. Because the quiet shame of it keeps us silent, convinced that we are the only ones harboring such ungenerous thoughts. We often tell ourselves that we should just be happy for the people we care about. That friendship means unconditional celebration. And when we find ourselves unable to muster that genuine enthusiasm, we might naturally assume there is some deep flaw in our character, a selfishness we never knew we had. But what if that quiet resentment toward a friend's success actually says very little about them and almost everything about our own unmet fears, hidden insecurities, and quiet desires? It is an uncomfortable thought, but a deeply human one. And it is something we can look at gently together, without any judgment, without rushing to fix it, and without drawing harsh conclusions about who we are. There is a cultural phrase, often used in places like Australia and the UK, called tall poppy syndrome, which is sometimes used to describe the tendency to criticize, resent, or cut down people who suddenly stand out from the crowd or achieve something significant, much like a field of flowers where the tallest one gets snipped, so they all remain exactly the same height. And while it is not a formal diagnosis or a clinical term, it is a profoundly accurate observation of how social circles sometimes react when someone rises above the established, comfortable baseline of the group. You might notice this happening in your own life in small, incredibly subtle ways, such as finding yourself quietly downplaying a friend's achievement in your head, reminding yourself of their past mistakes to balance the scales, or suddenly feeling a strange sense of competition with them, even though you never wanted to compete before. Or perhaps you find yourself actively avoiding conversations about their new life altogether, because hearing about it just makes your chest feel inexplicably tight, and your mind race with comparisons. This is where the feeling gets confusing and incredibly lonely, because you genuinely love this person, you really do, and you have likely spent years wanting good things for them, hoping they would find the success they were looking for. But the moment the good thing actually arrives, an invisible wall suddenly comes up between you, built entirely of your own unacknowledged discomfort. Many people notice that this tension is rarely about actual malice toward the friend, but rather it is a reaction to a sudden, jarring shift in the landscape of the friendship itself. Because friendships are so often built in the trenches of ordinary life, cemented over late-night conversations about not having enough money, feeling stuck in an unfulfilling job, complaining about the daily grind, or worrying endlessly about what the future might hold. There is a deep, unspoken comfort in knowing that you are navigating the heavy, uncertain parts of life side by side with someone who understands exactly what it feels like to be exactly where you are. And when one person suddenly leaps forward, breaking free from that shared struggle, it can feel as though the very foundation of the relationship has been altered overnight without your permission. It can feel like the sturdy bridge connecting you has been stretched or even broken, leaving you standing exactly where you were, looking at the same scenery, while they move on to a place you cannot reach, surrounded by people you do not know, dealing with problems you can no longer relate to. And some feel a quiet, unacknowledged loss in this moment, a very real mourning of the shared struggle that used to bind you together. Because if they are no longer struggling with the same things, it is natural to wonder who they are to you now, and perhaps more terrifyingly, who you are to them in this new, unfamiliar dynamic. Here is what envy quietly protects. It protects our fragile sense of safety, our ego and our identity, shielding us from the terrifying thought that we are somehow falling behind in a race we didn't even know we were running. And it builds a protective layer over our vulnerability, so we do not have to face the cold fear of being left behind while the rest of the world moves forward. When a friend succeeds, they inadvertently become a mirror. And sometimes that mirror reflects back the parts of our own lives where we feel stuck, unfulfilled, unsure, or deeply afraid, making it incredibly difficult to look at them without seeing our own perceived shortcomings staring back at us in high definition. It is sometimes described as a spotlight effect, where their shiny new achievement, their newfound confidence, or their sudden financial freedom casts a harsh, contrasting shadow over our own lives, making our beautifully ordinary days suddenly feel desperately inadequate, even if we were perfectly content with them just yesterday before we heard their news. People often experience this reaction not as a form of hatred or malice, but as a deep, aching vulnerability, a sudden, urgent questioning of their own worth, their own timeline, and their own place in the world, which is a heavy, exhausting burden to carry. When you are also trying to figure out how to show up and be a supportive friend. This brings us to another quiet realization, which is the question of whether they have changed, or if our perception of them is just coloring everything they do and say. Because when they start talking about their new income, their exciting new opportunities, or their new social circles, it can genuinely feel like they are speaking a completely different language, a language we have not yet learned how to translate. Many notice a quiet temptation to look for flaws in their new situation, to wonder if they are becoming arrogant, to question if they deserve it, or to secretly hope to find a small crack in the foundation of their success, just to reassure ourselves that they are still human, still the same messy, imperfect person we have always known, and still someone who needs us. This critical voice, this quiet, insidious urge to cut down the tall poppy, is often just a desperate, misplaced attempt to pull them back down to our level. Not because we want them to suffer, but so we do not have to feel so alone, so small, or so disconnected in the dust of their newfound momentum. It is a protective mechanism, a way the mind frantically tries to equalize the relationship again, and restore the old balance of power, even if the method it uses feels unfair, petty, or unsupportive. This is perhaps the most delicate, heartbreaking part of the entire experience. Realizing that we can hold two completely opposing truths at the exact same time, where we can genuinely love our friend, celebrate their spirit, and wish them the absolute best in life, while simultaneously feeling devastated, threatened, or profoundly saddened by what their success seems to mean for us and our own trajectory. Holding these two truths does not make us hypocrites, it does not mean our friendships are fake. And it does not mean we are toxic individuals, it simply makes us incredibly complicated, emotional beings who are trying our best to navigate the shifting sands of human connection and self-worth. Feeling conflicted about others' success does not make someone cruel, and it certainly does not mean they are incapable of being a loving, present, and supportive friend. It simply means they are caught in the deeply human web of comparison and shifting identity that we all must walk through at various points in our lives, whether we want to or not. Envy in these moments is often just a signal, much like a flashing light on the dashboard of our emotional lives, quiet pointing towards something we deeply, desperately long for, whether that is recognition, security, financial peace, creative fulfillment, or simply the profound reassurance that we still matter to the people we love, regardless of what we have achieved. We do not need to moralize this emotion, brand it as a failure of character, or punish ourselves endlessly for feeling it, because denying it, judging it, or shoving it down only makes it grow heavier and more persistent in the dark corners of our minds, where it can quietly poison the way we interact with the people we care about and the way we view ourselves. Some notice that when they simply allow themselves to feel the discomfort, the jealousy, or the fear, without attaching a heavy story of shame to it, the feeling begins to lose its sharp, suffocating edge, slowly softening into a quiet grief for the way things used to be, and eventually making room for a gentle, peaceful acceptance of the way things are now. There is a certain kind of relief in acknowledging that things have indeed changed, that the dynamic is different, and that it is perfectly okay to feel a little unsteady, a little awkward, or a little insecure while you figure out how to relate to this new version of your friend, and this entirely new version of your friendship. Many people find that they do not need to force a fake smile, pretending that the monumental shift hasn't happened, or completely ignoring their own tangled feelings. Because sometimes acknowledging the shift, even if you only ever do it quietly to yourself, is the most honest, authentic way to honor the relationship and give it the breathing room it needs to evolve into whatever it is meant to become next. It can feel like a quiet revelation to finally understand that your friend's success is not a judgment on your worth, your potential, or your past choices, And your discomfort with their success is not a judgment on your ability to love them or be there for them. But rather, both are simply realities existing side by side, asking for nothing more than a little bit of patience, a lot of self-compassion and quiet grace. Tall poppy syndrome, when we really look at it underneath the surface, strip away the guilt, and examine the core of the feeling, is not really about a secret, malicious hatred for those who do well. It is a profound, aching discomfort with distance. A very human, understandable reaction to the sudden, unfamiliar space that opens up between us and someone we deeply care about, and a quiet, persistent fear that in that widening space, we will somehow be forgotten, left behind, or deemed no longer necessary. Resentment often hides a much deeper, far more vulnerable desire to simply matter, to know that our presence is still deeply valued, and to be reassured without having to ask that our connection is secure. Even if we do not have the same shiny achievements, impressive titles, or life-changing milestones to bring to the table, real friendship often survives and sometimes even deepens. Not when insecurity is completely eliminated or perfectly conquered. Because we are all always a little bit insecure, but when it is acknowledged quietly, without shame, without blame. Allowing both people to stand exactly where they are, knowing the connection remains intact, resilient and beautiful regardless of how tall one poppy happens to grow in the sun. If this reflection resonated with you, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for being here.